Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. In this explainer, we're diving straight into a massive topic that literally touches every single one of our lives, our habits. We're looking at the foundations of behavioral change, constructing a daily practice, and specifically, Part 3, the role of ritual, and how something called taking refuge creates psychological safety. We are going to unpack the fascinating intersection of cutting-edge neurobiology and ancient contemplative traditions. And I promise you, by the end of this, you'll be looking at your morning routines in a completely different light. Okay, let's dive right in.
If you're new here, welcome to Bodhi Unified Flow. This is a space dedicated to one very specific mission. We simplify complexity and amplify performance. We take the dense, sometimes overwhelming science of human behavior and distill it into clear, actionable insights. Because changing your life and building sustainable habits, it really shouldn't feel like an impossible puzzle. It just requires structure, grounded energy, and a clear understanding of your own mind. And that's exactly the journey we're embarking on today.
All right, let's quickly review our agenda for today's explainer. 1. Introduction and objectives. 2. The neuroscience of habits. 3. Ritual as psychological safety. 4. Taking refuge in practice. 5. Constructing daily rituals. And finally, 6. Summary and references.
Section 1. Introduction and Objectives.
When you invest your time in learning something new, you need to know exactly what the return on that investment is going to be, right? So here are your takeaways for today. First, you're going to understand biological habit loops, meaning how your brain actually builds and dismantles your routines. Second, we'll define psychological safety through the lens of ritual. We'll look at why your brain actively fights change and how you can calm it down. And third, you'll learn how to apply the ancient concept of taking refuge to your daily practice. These are the practical tools you need to build a rock-solid foundation for any behavior change.
Section 2. The neuroscience of habits. To really understand habits, we have to look at the brain's energy economy. Think about the very first time you tried to learn how to drive a car, or even something as simple as using a new coffee machine. It took immense focus, didn't it? These are what we call effortful actions. They're driven by the prefrontal cortex. That's the area of your brain responsible for planning and active attention. And man, it requires a tremendous amount of energy. But as you repeat the action, your brain essentially goes, okay, we do this a lot. Let's save some energy. It transfers the routine downwards to the basal ganglia, specifically the striatum. At this point, it becomes an effortless routine. It's automated. You don't have to think about tying your shoes. Your basal ganglia just handles the whole shebang.
So, how exactly does an action travel from being a chaotic, exhausting new task to a reinforced, effortless neural pathway? It happens in a simple three-step loop. Step 1 is the action. You start doing something, and initially it feels tough. The basal ganglia is just starting to encode it. Step 2 is the reward. You finish the action, and you feel good, or you see a clear benefit. Your brain's dopaminergic system lights up. It provides the motivation that says, hey, that was totally worth our energy. Finally, step 3 is consolidation. The hippocampus, which is a massive player in memory, steps in to store the when, how, and where of this new behavior, while the prefrontal cortex integrates it into your actual sense of identity. Action, reward, consolidation. That's the loop.
And this entire loop brilliantly illustrates the magic of neuroplasticity, your brain's incredible capacity to literally rewire itself. When you consistently practice a habit, two amazing things happen. First, synaptic plasticity. This follows Hebb's rule. Neurons that fire together wire together. The connections between active neurons get stronger and much more efficient. Second, structural plasticity. This is the actual physical growth of new neurons and entirely new neural pathways. But here's the catch. How long does this rewiring take? Well, science shows it is definitely not an overnight process. Depending on the complexity of the task, forming a new automatic behavior can take anywhere from 18 to 254 days. Research shows it typically plateaus right around the 10-week mark. Your brain needs time and it needs repetition to pave these new roads.
Section 3. Ritual as psychological safety. All right, having established the biology, let's shift gears. Why does trying to change a habit feel so incredibly threatening? When you step into the unknown of behavior change, your brain's alarm system goes off. This is heavily driven by the amygdala. In green mind theory, these sudden spikes of anxiety and threat perception are called first arrows. Your amygdala fires a red alert because to our primitive biology, unpredictability literally equals danger. That's exactly why you feel a knot in your stomach when you're trying to break a bad habit. To counter this, we introduce ritual predictability. By creating a consistent, predictable ritual, we send a powerful signal to the nervous system. We are safe, there is no threat here. Predictability calms those red alerts, allowing your brain to actually learn without panicking. And that brings us to a profoundly beautiful concept from ancient Sanskrit texts, taking refuge, or apayadana. Historically, this is the practice of giving fearlessness, safety, and protection. But for us, in the context of behavioral change, I want you to view this as a hard psychological mechanism. When you construct a daily practice, you are essentially granting yourself apayadana. You're creating a safe, highly predictable refuge for your mind, shielding it from the amygdala's blaring alarms, and giving yourself the absolute psychological protection needed to grow.
It's amazing how perfectly this ancient wisdom maps onto modern science. Green mind theory shows us that immersive, mindful routines actively quiet internal distress. When you immerse yourself in a safe, repeated ritual, it acts as a biological buffer against everyday stress. It suppresses the amygdala's red alerts, it increases affiliative bonding chemicals like oxytocin, and it literally allows your brain to adapt and physically rewire itself safely. Your nervous system just cannot rewire effectively if it's locked in a state of defense. Ritual is the antidote. Section 4. Taking refuge in practice. Let's look at how taking refuge actually maps onto clinical stages of behavior change. In the trans-theoretical model, when you're in pre-contemplation or contemplation, meaning you're just thinking about changing, your amygdala's threat response is sky high. Everything feels daunting. But as you apply a ritual intervention, a small, highly predictable daily action, you start building that refuge. Moving into preparation and action, the ritual creates safety, lowering the perceived threat. By the time you hit the maintenance stage, where the habit is becoming an effortless routine in the basal ganglia, the amygdala's threat response is extremely low. The ritual is the bridge that gets you safely from merely thinking about change to actually sustaining it.
Section 5. Constructing daily rituals. So with all this theory and hard science under our belts, here is the million-dollar question. How do we actually design daily routines that the brain perceives as a safe refuge, rather than just another exhausting chore? Because let's face it, if your new habit feels like a punishment, your brain is absolutely going to reject it. We need to pivot now to actionable behavioral design.
Here are the core construction principles you need. Number 1. Consistency wildly outperforms intensity. Do not try to change your entire life for an hour once a week. Science shows that practicing a new behavior for just 10 to 15 minutes daily creates far more reliable neuroplastic changes. It is the minimum effective dose. Number 2. Focus on acquiring a new behavior. Clinical research tells us the brain has a really hard time forming a neural pathway for not doing something. So instead of trying to suppress a bad habit, build a new, positive one to take its place. And finally, number 3. Optimize your choice architecture. We humans naturally gravitate toward what is easiest. So arrange your environment so your new ritual is the path of least resistance. Make the good habit highly visible, and put friction right in front of the old ones.
Section 6. Summary and references.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today, so let's check back in on those learning objectives. We successfully mapped the biological habit loop, tracking behaviors from the effortful prefrontal cortex down to the effortless basal ganglia. We defined taking refuge not just as a beautiful contemplative idea, but as a literal biological downregulator for your amygdala's threat response. And most importantly, we provided actionable, science-backed steps for constructing daily rituals. You now have the actual blueprint to simplify the complexity of your mind and amplify your daily performance.
Here on our final slide is a curated list of the scientific and contemplative references we drew from for this explainer. I highly encourage you to explore these if you want to deepen your journey of practice. Thank you so much for joining me today on Bodhi Unified Flow. Keep learning, keep practicing, and I'll catch you in the next explainer. But before we go, I want to leave you with this final thought. Excellence isn't a single act. It's a habit born from a safe, daily ritual. So what refuge will you build for your mind today?